Salute from the Coachella Valley in Southern California, and this is Solomon. And I am here today interviewing Weronika. Now, Veronica, how do you pronounce your last name?
It's just Kuzniar.
Kuzniar? Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about her book, Positive Christian, which is basically Hitler's views on Christianity. I ordered this book a few months ago, read it pretty quickly, and then recently I've been going over it again just for this interview to freshen my perspective on it. And first, Veronica, just before we talk about some of the talking points of the book, what inspired you to write this book?
It was basically because I kept coming across information online that Hitler was either a pagan or an atheist, or that he was actually Antichrist, like the embodiment of that concept, and it just got old and stale. So that can't be further from the truth. So that's what this book is about. It's also basically like I guess you'd call it kind of a guidebook as to how to be a good National Socialist Christian, like what that would look like in practice. And I guess the main tenet would be that you have to be anti-Jewish. There is no way around that.
Right, yeah. And see, going to that point about Hitler and this propaganda about him being an antichrist, the only thing that I heard about Hitler, growing up was, in terms of his religious views, was Time magazine used to come out with these books that you can order in the 80s, and there was one about Hitler's fascination with Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy. So that's what I had in my head the whole time and never really looked into it. But this book was real eye-opening to me about his real views. And you're right, that's what I hear. I hear, pagans trying to identify Hitler to their view, and even Christian identity, which Hitler's views are unique. They're definitely not Christian identity. And he's, like you said, he's definitely not a pagan. He is a Christian. So yeah, it's interesting how people try to adopt Hitler to their view. But and speaking of Hitler's views of Jesus, like, he views Jesus as an idealist, and he, I know Thomas Dalton uses this kind of language too about the Aryan biospirit and worldview versus the Judeo biospirit and worldview, which, in your book, in chapter 12, page 201, I know that it talks about Christian spirituality versus crass Jewish materialism. Can you talk about some of how you view that? And when I think of Aryan, I'm not thinking of the racial aspect of it, more of just what the word means, noble. That kind of just being like chivalrous, noble, being an idealist, and how Hitler viewed Jesus in terms of that versus the Jewish spirit, which is, very materialistic.
Right. Well, originally Hitler did start out kind of characterizing humanity as either Aryan or Jew. He never specifically defines Aryan, and that's more like getting into the racial stuff. Later on down the road, he starts to be more specific about his racial views, which was specifically. So the Aryan was basically replaced with Nordic. And he believed that the Nordic race corps was the most important in regards to organizing states, leadership, that kind of stuff. It wasn't superior, like in the sense that that was the best race on earth. It was just in a certain sense that he was looking for. And that was specifically like leadership and state organization and whatnot. But as far as Aryan, back when he first started, he saw those as the peoples or the type of man that was being taken advantage of by Jewry, infiltrated by Jewry, just a whole different type of man, if you will. So there was kind of the Aryan and the Jew, the Aryan that's tied to the soil, that works, that believes in fairness, and then the Jew that comes in and exploits, that only believes in profit, that, any means to get to the profit is okay. So there's no moral or ethical debasement that isn't possible with Jews. So I would say that's the key difference there. And there's a little bit of that in Christopher Houghton's Race, I think it's Race in the Third Reich is the name of his book. I don't quote me on that. I can't remember off the top of my head. But his book, he talks about how there was like the Nordic race soul and the Jewish race soul, and that the two were competing not only at the spiritual level, but in the physical realm. So that's kind of the same idea.
Right. That's interesting because that's kind of how I'm viewing my worldview is kind of being that binary right now, where I look at things as from an Aryan perspective. And again, when I think of Aryan, I'm thinking of those things that you said about the character of a man, and versus the Judeo worldview, which is, like you said, for profit. Like we see this, capitalism and, the debt usury economy that we're in, and the predatory practices of the banking system, and just the nature of what America's become in terms of, I call it getting the bag, the hustle. That's what
Right.
has become paramount to people, versus the Aryan worldview, which is I view it as, like what you said, just having an honorable spirit, fairness, like you said, and the European man and woman, they are known for that, for fairness, for having this kind of empathy, which sometimes has left them open to what we're seeing today in Europe and in America with third world immigration coming in and upsetting the present culture, and now the hatred towards white people. But yeah, that's interesting. So that's kind of like I love the way it's coined by the book about Jewish crass materialism versus the
Mhm.
Christianity being more of a spiritual religion. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of when we talk about the Marxist tendencies in the Torah, and
Mhm.
and we'll talk more about like how Christianity is not really a true Christianity that's going to be healthy, shouldn't be rooted in the Torah. And I agree with that. But I just wanted to talk about too, in chapter 3 of your book, Hitler on Religion, in
Mhm.
the speech in Berlin on January 30th. Now, Hitler, he expected respect from the denominations of Christianity, which were, basically at this point, Protestantism and Catholicism, that he gave them. He gave them an autonomy. He wasn't really overly concerned with their, theological differences. He envisioned a unity among them, like kind of a Reich church, and he expected the same from them. But it appears to me that the churches had this parasitic nature of just being constantly a thorn in the side of him and National Socialism, and kind of may have contributed a little bit to, or even a lot to, the eventual downfall of National Socialism in Germany. What, how do you view that, and how do you see that happening today too, like in America with the churches involving in government being very pro-Israel?
Yeah, I mean, Hitler was very conciliatory towards Catholicism. The whole Concordat thing was very important to him to make sure relations with the Vatican were right. And that was something he did immediately. And also with the Protestant churches, he basically said, we're not your enemy, but if you continue to basically attack National Socialism and everything the government stands for from the pulpit, then you will be made an example of. So he did persecute certain priests and pastors that continued to raise their voices against National Socialism in the new state. And it was always in defense of liberalism and Jews, every single time. That's what the church was all about, Jews and protecting them, and how dare you, Hitler, and this evil government and liberal values. And so you kind of see, well, if you're against those things, then Hitler had every right to go after them. And of course, if a priest or pastor signed an affidavit basically to not attack the government anymore, they were released from the concentration camps and they were allowed to go about their business as usual. So Hitler had a very hands-off approach when it came to the churches, as long as they weren't causing trouble in this respect. And yes, we are seeing the same thing in America today with the LGBTQ thing. The churches are just more and more supporting, and including the Vatican, homosexuality. gay marriage, women priests and pastors, and just being gay in the church. Like, this is something that's totally okay and has always been normal, and the world is just evil for not understanding that it's okay. And there's churches that support the child tranny thing too, which to me is just outrageous. It can't be more unnatural.
Right, I agree. And, growing up in the church, we hear these pastors hailed as heroes, in National Socialist Germany, when in reality they were just political subversives. The same thing happens today in a lot of the missionary
Right.
projects, like that. You have these missionaries from Calvary Chapel that have gone to like Islamic countries, and then
Mhm.
they're hailed as these kind of not martyrs because they don't die for their faith over there, but they get jailed and imprisoned, yeah, as being persecuted. But in reality, it's found out, and I found this out through someone involved in Calvary Chapel, that the reason why these pastors or these missionaries are often jailed in Islamic countries, not because of religious reasons, but because they're actually getting involved in politics over there. And
Right,
so,
right.
yeah,
And that was a huge problem. So Hitler said, if you are really a Christian who's concerned with the spiritual realm, then what are you all doing meddling in politics and getting involved in this in the first place? These are two separate spheres. And so he made a very clear separation of church and state in the National Socialist system. There was a very clear separation, and the church is the one that kept overstepping the boundary. So they wanted to meddle in politics, and that's why they got their hand bit, basically.
right, yeah, and we're seeing that
And it
today
was
again.
Pastor
Yeah,
Niemöller in particular. He's like the ultimate martyr. And that he was in a concentration camp, but he survived. He never died. And all he had to do was sign the form to stop meddling, and he would have been released. But he chose to be a martyr. He wanted to be like the thorn in the side and the whole liberal Jewish rallying point. He wanted that. So he was just an egotist.
right. And you see, and even recently, like, I'm not a big Trump guy or nothing, but when Trump made some very strong statements about having a wall to prevent, MS-13, that gang from pouring into the country, a lot of Christians got offended at what he said. So it's
Right.
this subversive working against the interests of your own nation.
Hmm.
And you're a Christian, like you said. To be real, Christianity is a separate thing than getting involved in the state, from
Yeah,
the teachings of the Christ.
it should be concerned strictly with the spiritual realm, the person's spirit, their soul. It has nothing to do with politics.
Right. Totally agree. So yeah, then, talking about, going back to the Jews and um,
Hmm.
one of their, one of the statements that I've heard made is that Judaism is the incarnation of hatred, and this hatred, from reading, chapters, it was a chapter 7 of your book,
Hmm.
um, page 132, about pornography being used as a weapon of mass destruction against Christianity,
Hmm.
where there was this thing, at least in the 1980s, from, I believe it's, is it Dr. Lash, Dark Moon, his
Yeah.
website? Yeah.
Hmm.
Where he said it was predominant in the 80s, where you had these male performers that were often Jewish and they were paired with female Roman Catholics. And it was this just hatred towards
Right.
Christianity, kind of like revenge. Can
Hmm.
you speak on that, and how involved the Jews are in pornography in America?
They pretty much dominate it, like I would say 100%. The thing is, though, is it only takes one or two Jews, and then I call it their willing force multipliers, that you only need a couple of them at the head of an organization or a movement, and then everybody else, all the quote unquote goyim, fall into line. So their force multiplication is also a problem. And that's something I've talked about before. And Germany had the same thing. It wasn't always 100% Jewish, but it would be a Jewish leader of something. They had that sex institute in Germany. And in fact, they actually had a transgender in Germany, like the first I think it was a male to female transgender was born from Weimar, Germany.
Oh,
which,
wow.
was considered like the Jew of Europe. Berlin, I think it was Berlin was considered the Jew of Europe back in the day before the Nazis came into power. So once again, that Sex Research Institute, it was nothing but Alfred Kinsey style filth, smut, porn. That's all it was. And those were, in fact, the books that were burned by the Nazis. So everybody acts like, oh, the book burning, it was so horrible. It was all trash. It was just pornography and trash that was burned. There were a few Jewish and liberal authors that were thrown in there, but again, pretty much just trash, worthless trash. That's how I'd put it. Nothing edifying whatsoever. And we have the same thing today, as though pornography or anything the Jews put out is edifying. It isn't. It's always about subversion and going after the moral, ethical underpinnings of any society. That's how the Jews bring societies down. So same thing back in Germany.
Yeah, and go
It
ahead,
just
sorry.
never stops.
Yeah, it's interesting because my uncle, and I live north of Palm Springs, which is, it's like probably a mini version of the Weimar Republic. And I have an uncle who's a homosexual. So when he heard
Okay.
that I was researching Hitler, he said, "Well, I'm going to do some research too." And we would debate. And so the good thing about my uncle is that we could be very open with each other, and we get very passionate, but we're cool with each other right away. But
Right.
he came to me, he said, "Oh, I've been doing some research," and he said exactly what you said, that it was the Jews who, basically created this situation in Germany, in the Weimar Republic, where it was filled with pornography, but he's saying it as a good thing. Like, my uncle's actually saying this is a good thing, but he
Right.
acknowledges it's the Jews, and he acknowledged that the National Socialists and Hitler got rid of all that, and he says, "Oh yeah, it was very avant-garde," and so he's saying this is a good thing. So this is like someone who's not pro-Hitler at all, but he's
Right.
acknowledging, but he's obviously taking the opposite position, like what Hitler did was bad, and what the Jews did in Germany was good. So it's a fact. Even those who, don't like Hitler admit that Hitler cleaned up that aspect of Germany. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, it's crazy. And we're seeing it obviously in America on steroids, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes sense that somebody who's homosexual would side with the Jews, because the Jews always go for the underdog groups, and then they use them as a battering ram against the majority that they're trying to bring down. In the case of Germany, it was often like the Czechs, the Poles. It was basically Aryan, as it were, or white European ethnic minorities in Germany, in the German Empire, that were used as a battering ram against the German majority. And Hitler talks about that. That's like really big in Mein Kampf, and in the memoirs of Gustl Kubitschek, his best friend when he was younger. Hitler used to go and just sit and listen to the parliamentary debates and whatnot, and the filibustering. And he said, "Can you believe these minorities? They just talk and talk and talk, and they filibuster so that nothing can ever get done in parliament. They're just doing it just to stall." And that's exactly what they were doing. So they did the exact same thing with Jewish help and funding in Germany that they're doing in America today with our minorities. The Black Lives Matter, the illegal immigration, it's 100% Jewish. So it is important to try to separate the Black people and the immigrants that are being used from the Jews that are using them. I consider the Jews are ultimate enemy number one, the most guilty. Not that illegal immigration and stuff and what Blacks are doing is okay, but there's somebody pulling the strings and funding that and encouraging it. Who gives these people in Guatemala and who knows? There's all kinds of places, Haiti. There's North African countries, for heaven's sake, that are coming over to somehow getting to the Mexican border. Who's planting the idea in these immigrants' heads to even come to the border? And then how are they getting there? Well, George Soros, who thinks he's God. He literally is on the record as saying, "I feel like I'm some kind of God." And he talks about how he's bordering between madness and genius. A Jewish supposed Holocaust survivor who came from nothing and turns out to be like one of the richest human beings on earth. And the first thing he does with his wealth is try to destroy all the European countries because, like you say, there is a hatred. It's actually like this dual jealousy and envy. The Jews envy Europeans, but they're also extremely jealous of Europeans. And so they hate us and they are going to destroy us. And Hitler and I believe it was Dietrich Eckart, and I can read the little passage from Bolshevism from Moses to Lenin if you want me to.
Sure, yeah.
They
Go.
basically talk about how this is the very nature of the Jew. They cannot help themselves. And Hitler basically says the tragedy of Lucifer. He knew, like the whole allegory of Lucifer, he knew that challenging God was going to be his demise, and yet he did it anyway. No matter how much God told him, no, not going to happen, he did it anyway. It's the same thing with Jews. That's going to bring you down. That's going to be your destruction. They do it anyway. So, and lo and behold, here we are.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing too is you mentioned something earlier about the Jews always pick the underdog. And it goes back to me, it goes back to this, the way I look at the Judeo worldview versus the Aryan worldview, that the Aryan worldview is one of the eternal struggle. It embraces struggle, whereas
Right.
the Judeo worldview seeks equality in a utopia, which is unrealistic, as we know. And because of that, like you said, they choose the underdog, and then they have to subvert nature, which then produces exactly what we have today. And you mentioned something, you're right. We do have to separate, like you said, the blacks and the illegal immigrants from what the Jews are doing. Because even in the black community right now, because I tap in with different genres, and the blacks right now are feeling super betrayed by the Democrats because a lot of illegal immigrants are pouring into black neighborhoods, and the governments, like in Chicago, they're placing these immigrants in black neighborhoods. In Chicago, they gave these illegal immigrants $51 million, which is going to run out in July, and then they may give them another several million. And so the blacks are feeling super, super betrayed now, like they've been betrayed by the Democrat Party. Now they want to vote for Trump. So they've been used, and now they've realized, probably too late for them, because they're being gentrified out of their neighborhoods, but they were used as a pawn, and now it seems like they're being discarded by the left.
Right. There's actually a passage from the Otto Wagner memoirs. That's Hitler Memoirs of a Confidant, one of his early essay men. It goes right along with that. And whether Hitler said this or Wagner, there is a little bit of debate on how verbatim these memoirs are because they were written post facto. But Wagner had a remarkable memory. And this is what he wrote in a conversation that took place between he and Hitler. So he wrote, "As for the British form, which, as I have come to realize, is also predominant in America and all other democracies of the Western stamp, it exploits democracy only as a mock organization, while through the Masonic Lodge and other similar secret and public societies, or even directly with money, which is the Jews, it puts those names on the party's candidate lists that make up the equally secretive executive committee, which in turn represents the actual power interests." Hitler supposedly says, "I cannot reconcile myself to this form, for at heart it is nothing but a betrayal of the people. I do not want to betray the people, and in the long run they cannot be betrayed, at least not the German folk, for at bottom the German folk is truly democratic. I don't need a lodge. I don't need any secret societies that pretend to the folk that it is electing its men, while in reality they put their men on the lists and get them elected. I'd be ashamed of abusing the trust offered me by this folk, which has been so severely downtrodden and betrayed, which looks to me with a last glimmer of hope. That is why I must work to win over the masses," end quote. Now that definitely sounds like something Hitler would have said. And it's remarkable whether it came from either one of those men, because both of them were quote unquote Nazis. So that right there is the Nazi worldview as far as what is happening in democracies, what happened then and today. So this goes right along with what you said. They're betrayed because they really are betrayed. They're just being used. All of us are being used. That's what democracy is all about. And that's why the Nazis called democracy an instrument of Judaism. It's just the flip side of communism.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, I see this, in the workforce, this capitalist mentality of, money at all cost, the debt usury, getting people in debt, and it's capitalism is like, that's all that matters. If it's something that can make money within industry, it will be whatever subversion that's a consequence of it, so be it, as long as it can make a profit, which is why we see the illegal immigrants coming in here, because they know that that's going to be cheaper labor for them. And then the citizen, no matter what race, is going to suffer. They're going to get lesser wages. And now the black community is realizing this, because like I said, I kind of lurk in the shadows there in their little communities, and I just want to see what they have to think about things. And they've woken up. Now hopefully it's not too late for them, but they've been, it's happened to everybody, all Americans that are citizens. And like you said, it's just the illegal immigrants are being used again. They're the tool now being used, whereas before it was the blacks, in the 60s and the civil rights movement. And so it's just the continued subversion. And then as soon as the useful tool is, they've done all they can with it, then they discard it, which is what is happening to the blacks right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, America's definitely on a downward trajectory. And I think Russia's going to be the one that buries us. And it's something that has to happen. Unfortunately, we're going to be in the throes of it. But I kind of see this as we're turning into the former USSR, and they're becoming the new world order, as it were, the new, better world that we can have. And I'm sure China's going to be right along with Russia. I don't think they're going to cling to the United States. I think we're going down.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
it's
And
because of
people, go ahead.
rotting currency. We have let Jews completely destroy our economy with usury. And it's not lending and finance. People have to stop calling it lending and finance. It's usury. It just has a different label. We would not be paying $1 million for a mediocre home and $70,000 for some stupid electric car if it wasn't for Jewish usury in this country. That is what has rotted the dollar. So people have got to get to that level where you go, no, this is not normal. It's not okay. We're
Right.
not
And
there yet.
yeah, and that is exactly that capitalist predatory system of economics and usury is what you see in the churches in terms of the preaching for money, right? The
Right.
pastors, the exorbitant lifestyle of the pastors in Christianity, and the churches being encouraged, the old Protestant work ethic, as they call it, which is another interesting thing, especially from reading your book, War Wolves of the Iron Cross, and the Puritans and Pilgrims. But the churches now, they preach a very materialistic doctrine, this
Right.
Protestant work ethic to fund the debt usury economy of America, which is very Jewish. And now, and it's going to go into the next, question I have is now in chapter 7, Hitler, according to Eckhart's Bolshevism from Moses to Lenin, and the Marxist tendencies in the Torah. And it's very fascinating to me because a lot of Christians don't know this, but like you mentioned in the book, that the two documents, the Old Testament and New Testament, were stapled together hundreds of years after Christ. And I'm being honest, and I know that people that are listening, because I do, will read out of the Old Testament and everything. I'm being honest. I do see things in there that are very tend towards Marxism, and we're seeing the fruits of that because there's this new wave of Christianity where they're wanting to keep the Torah and they're wanting to keep all these laws from the Old Testament. This is like the Judaization of modern Christianity. So can you talk about that, how you view that, the Torah and the Marxist tendencies in it?
I don't know that I've ever noticed that personally, but as far as the NSDAP was concerned, they expunged the entire Old Testament. It was cut off from the Bible completely, and a new quote unquote Nazified Bible was issued. They also removed all of St. Paul's information and references. So that was what this one researcher, who's in fact Jewish also, his name is Steigmann Gall. He's some professor. He said it was Pauline Christianity. That was also expunged. So all of the Jewish stuff was expunged from the New Testament. And then the Nazis issued this new Bible and they said, this is what it should be. This is what the Bible actually is without the Antichrist corruption in it. So, and they did very much believe, like at least Hitler, he said, basically the Jews are anti-Christic if anybody is. And I think he called Roosevelt an anti-Christic or antichrist type person. So he said, I'm not the antichrist. The press is always calling me that. I couldn't be further from that. So Hitler absolutely denied that. And anybody that tries to say, oh yeah, he was a Freemason, no, he wasn't. They tried to recruit him. And as soon as he found out what they were doing, he's like, that's ridiculous. I'm out of here. And he walked right out on all those people. And Goering also became a Freemason too, but fortunately he got out just at the right time, right before he was about to be, I guess, indoctrinated into the lodge or whatever. He ended up going to the National Socialist. So that's an important point, because you'll see that a lot too, where Hitler was a secret Mason and he makes this triangular hand sign in one speech. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah,
Not
there's a
true.
lot of, what I found out, I don't know if you found this in the white nationalist circles, but there's a lot of them that actually haven't read Mein Kampf, and they have a warped view of Hitler that's kind of similar. Like, I did a video before on one of my other channels about, would the National Socialists have approved of these like Aryan prison gangs, and the way, that this is not really an Aryan, but it's people that don't read Hitler and don't understand him, turn him into something that he is not. And like you said, one of them's pagan, one of them's like this New Ager or
Right.
Theosophist that I one time thought, or, for these, prison gangs, like this, like real cringe, they have a view of Hitler that's like this kind of just monstrous view, when the real view of Hitler is
Right.
just very rational and very, and reading him and reading Mein Kampf, I mean, I'm on board with his whole philosophy on life. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, people don't realize, and I've told people that, that I read Mein Kampf, I'm reading it right now, and their eyes pop open. I just say, listen, it's a very normal book. It's not sensationalistic. It's just very matter of fact. His philosophy on life, politics, religion. Obviously, he does talk about the Jews, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not the sensationalist like comic book that probably people envision. Like, you know, it's totally false representation. So, do you think in white nationalist circles that do you find a lot of them really just haven't read Mein Kampf, and they have a false view of Hitler?
I don't really look at that kind of stuff anymore. I mean, it's so far removed now. I just don't have time. But from what I've experienced in the past, a lot of them were very short on any kind of reading and research.
Right.
So that is a very valid point. They just have it wrong. Like the whole pagan or he was an atheist, that's just not correct. He repeatedly, and the one thing that you'll find with Hitler, and the real contention is the table talks, and I can talk about that a little bit. That is the only document, and it's specifically the Hugh Trevor Roper edition, which had the input of Genoux, who was very anti-Christian and who did document forgeries. Francois Genoux, I think is his name. Hugh Trevor Roper worked with him on that version of Table Talk, and you'll find these strange, very anti-Christian rants in that version that are not in the Picker or the Hoffman versions. I think it's Hoffman. So there's two other versions of Table Talk that were in German only, and they're only partial. They didn't have like every single entry, some were missing. And then this researcher I believe he's Swedish, Mikael Nilsson, he went into basically like deep research into the table talks, trying to find the original source material, if it even existed. And he said it doesn't. There is nothing left of any original source material. So everything you're seeing is a copy of something. That's the original source material now, a copy. And that includes the Bormann material. The Bormann documents were supposedly handed to I think it was Trevor Roper. And then David Irving got to look at them, but he was never given them by Genu. And just by looking at the copies, David Irving said, oh, yeah, they're genuine. And Hugh Trevor Roper accepted the copies as genuine. They were photocopies with extensive lines through the text and then writing above the original writing. So I don't know how these historians went for that. But basically, what Nilsson found is there's no original source material. All three versions contradict one another. There's pieces missing, there's interjections that were added, there's complete fabrications, like some entries that are just completely fabricated in the Hugh Trevor Roper and don't exist in either of the German versions. And so he basically said the document is worthless as a source. It is worthless. You have to just discard it because we have no idea what is or isn't correct in this document. That is the only document where Hitler has anything like borderline virulent to say about Christianity. But even in that document, Hitler never, ever denounces Jesus himself. And he says that, in fact, Jesus was not Jewish, but an Aryan. And he says it could be true that his mother was I guess he said like a Jewess or whatever. Because I guess the Talmud says something about a whore and a Roman soldier. That's who Jesus's parents really were. And Hitler said that may well be true. Maybe his mother was a Jewess, but it just didn't even factor in. He shrugged it off as nothing. So
Right.
that's something that's important.
Yeah, and if he had even said anything virulent about Christianity, I mean, most Christians at one time or another do say stuff about Christianity because we see the hypocrisy of Christianity. I mean, I've railed against it, but it's obviously, but like you said, even if that document is true, he didn't rail against the founder of Christianity, which is Jesus.
Right. And he's never against the religion itself or the spirituality. He's against the clericalism, the hypocrisy, and just the childishness. But again, he's thinking Old Testament, the whole thing as one entity. It is ridiculous. I myself, after encountering what Hitler said about Christianity, that's when I stepped away from it and said, this is so Jewish, it's just pathetic. Something's not right with this. And so then I got interested in the Nazi version of Christianity and what they thought about it. And it makes so much more sense that Jesus was the first fighter against Jewish materialism, that they distorted with cunning what Christ actually said that was documented in the Greek versions of the Bible. The Nazis believed that Luther was told terms that weren't correct when he was translating it into German. So racial kinsman became neighbor because Jews helped him translate it from Greek into German. And that's Martin Luther. So there are a lot of things that the Nazis researched, and I think it was Rosenberg in particular, Alfred Rosenberg, who was in charge of de-Judaizing the Bible and finding out what elements were actually viable and needed to be put into the new Nazi Bible. I'm pretty sure that was Rosenberg, and he's supposed to be Mr. Anti-Christian Pagan #1.
Right. Well, that's the thing about combining the Old and New Testaments a few hundred years after Christ, is that now a Christian, if he wants to justify things like usury, materialism, pursuing riches and building wealth, they have to go to the Old Testament, because if you stick with the words of Jesus, he taught against materialism, he taught against serving money, he taught against usury, and like you said, he was a fighter against the Jews. I mean, that's very clear from the scriptures. I mean, that you even bring up in Positive Christian, 1 John chapter 2, John 8:44, Revelation 2:9 and 3:9. So I feel that this Old Testament emphasis, and we're seeing it now in Christianity again with this Hebrew roots movement, is now people can get out of keeping the teachings of Jesus by just citing the Old Testament,
Right, right. And the Nazis talked about that too. When you read the memoirs of Otto Wagner, and then Bolshevism from Moses to Lenin, which are the memoirs of Dietrich Eckart, the the overriding theme from Hitler is that Jesus was a complete overturning of the Jewish world order. It was an utter rejection of that. The Jews freaked out. They couldn't handle it. It was taking off. It was effectively the rule of labor over capital. That's how Hitler puts it. Right now, we have the rule of capital over labor. That is the fundamental world problem that has never been resolved. What happened in Jesus's day, according to the Nazis and Hitler specifically, is that Jews realized the power of what Christ was teaching, Christianity. They subverted it just like they subverted communism. They turned it into something that it really wasn't, and basically made it into like a proto-communist movement where, if you're poor, that's okay. You'll have your kingdom and your rewards in heaven, so stay poor. It was a complete undermining of what Jesus actually taught. And so they destroyed his movement too, just like they destroyed Russian communism. And Hitler does make a distinction. He says, Russian communism, there's some good there. We could actually maybe work with that. But Bolshevism, I will never, ever negotiate with that. That must be utterly destroyed. So he made the distinction and realized that Jews are what destroyed and subverted communism and turned it into this absolute monstrosity, which they've done the same thing to capitalism. I don't know how anyone who isn't like ultra wealthy right now and benefiting from this horrific system can defend it. We have absolute rule of capital over labor. Humans are worthless in this system.
Well, you make a good point. And the one thing, and this is from one of your other videos, and I don't remember which one, but it's one of your podcasts, and it's what I see every day in the streets, and I'm sure you do wherever you are, is I see just a mass of homeless people that are drug addicted. And one thing I remember you saying that resonated with me, it's like they're committing this slow suicide with this drug addiction, heroin, crack, meth.
Right.
And again, this is the result of capitalism, a debt usury economy that is a predatory economy and just takes people's soul and it just robs them of any type of self-dignity and worth. I see it every day. I'm not far from it. I know most of us aren't far from that. If, maybe not even the drugs aspect of being homeless, not being able to take care of yourself. And so this is what that type of economy and that type of crass materialistic mindset does. And, I won't get into it too much here because it's a part of your other book, War Wolves of the Iron Cross, but I was really blown away by learning more about the Pilgrims and Puritans, how theirs was a Judaizing movement. And these are people I always upheld as like, the founding of America. But
okay, are you talking about Albion and Zion United?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That is Calvinism. And I've talked about Calvinism. That is basically Judaism for Gentiles. And it took root in England. And that makes sense because England was so Judaized.
Absolutely.
They were like the first ones that let those Jews right back in there. And then they took over the Bank of England. That's what made England into this warmonger bastard nation that went around subjugating and annihilating everybody. It was because of Jewry once again. And the Jews had a vested interest in continuing to fund the warfare. And so once they said, oh, this is big money, getting these goyim to kill each other, let's encourage that. So then they started getting into politics and encouraging more warfare, more BS from the Jews. It's like this cycle that once they get into your government and your political system, you're stuck. And that's where America's at. You can see it in Ukraine right now. In England, I read Daily Stormer all the time. England's 100% correct. The Afghanistan thing, Iraq, Ukraine, it is 100% Jewish. None of those wars was in our interest as Americans. None of them. We can get on with all those people with no problem. It's the Jews that cause us to hate each other.
Absolutely. And, and even, because I've had people tell me, well, it's not rational to hate all of them. And I said, well, it's not hatred, but I had dinner about a year ago before even the war in Russia. It was the night that the war between Russia and Ukraine broke out. I had dinner with a friend, and he brought his friend who was a Jew, and we actually had a good conversation. We had a lot in common, sports. But he even said, and he's telling me this, he doesn't know what I believe. He's telling me that when he went to Israel, that the Jews there kind of would be like, oh, well, you're an American Jew. But he would lecture them that they should love America because of America's love for Israel. So it even let me know that this Jew, who was a nice guy, we talked, everything was fine, but his love for America was only insofar as America supporting Israel, which told me his loyalties to Israel. So it's not this hatred you have towards them, but you just know where their loyalty lies, and their
right, exactly.
Right. And their interest is contrary to our interest.
And that's the point that the Nazis made. And that's why they had to separate them and get them out. And as I've told people many times, the final solution to the Jewish problem was banishment. Get them out of here, to forcibly remove them. It has nothing to do with gassing them. That's 100% hoax. That's like the greatest hoax ever told. It's unbelievable how nonsensical it is. Just unbelievable. And I mean, I've gone into the Holocaust as much as needs to be, but I think that Friedrich Berg, he alone completely undid it. And then you had the IHR that undid it. So, and the Jews don't like that. That's why they're moving after all the books now. See, there were too many people, too many independent authors. Here's what happened. There was something called Create Space. Amazon owned Create Space. I believe they bought it. I published through Create Space, and so did many others. I think Germar Rudolph was even publishing some of his Holocaust handbooks through Create Space. The Jews of Amazon found out, or Jews that basically supported Amazon, customers as it were, the ADL found out. So what happens is Create Space, for whatever reason, all of a sudden goes away, and it becomes KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. So now you are directly under Amazon's control. They assumed all the control over the publishing from Create Space and eradicated that branch. Create Space no longer exists. So now it's KDP. Well, KDP started coming down on everybody. Germar got banned. I believe Thomas Dalton might have been using it. All these people, they came down with the hammer and said, sorry, you're all banned. Amazon banned them all. Mine went the longest. And I kind of have a feeling that it was because of the covers. Hyenas of High Finance, Union Jackal. They didn't quite know what the books were about. And so I do have a feeling that my covers and my titles saved my books for the longest time. And they finally came down and banned mine. And you know what they told me? They told me, oh, well, you're infringing copyright. You don't own the copyright on your books. You need to prove that you own the copyright and that that's your book, actually. I'm like, what are you talking about? I have the documentation from the US Copyright Office on all of these. I submitted all that to them, and they said, sorry, you need to prove your copyright. And so they started taking them down one by one. And then I noticed it was originally National Socialist Christian, and it had Jesus, a swastika, and the German eagle on the front cover. That was banned for hate. They wouldn't tell me specifically in the book what was the problem with it. They just said, owing to the content, this book has been removed. So then I thought, okay, well, let's use a friend's bank account and reopen it and just change all of the verbiage. Basically, we were going to put out covert versions of the books. So the verbiage would be completely changed. Like the Nazis would be something totally different, like a totally different word altogether. And everything would be basically in parables. You have to speak in parables for fear of the Jews, literally. So we were going to put out these covert ones. But what happened is it was under my friend's account, but with my bank account. They knew it was my bank account and banned his account based on the bank account. They said, nope, we banned you. Different IP address, different person altogether, completely separate Amazon account, everything, and they knew strictly by the checking account number. So Amazon they have just got way too much power, way too much power. So now I have to keep the printer I have completely secret, because if even one Jew or Shabbos Goyim, one of their force multipliers, reports it, it's over. They'll ban
Yeah.
all.
And they do have their Shabbos Goyim, because that's what got
They
me
do.
terminated at my job at State Farm, was Shabbos Goyim that said they were Hebrew, like these Hebrew roots Christians.
Yeah.
Because I was speaking
Unbelievable.
against the Jews in the Holocaust. That becomes more important to these Christians. If you deny the Holocaust, you are like persona non grata. But if you deny the cross of Jesus, you're more likely to stay in fellowship than if you deny the Holocaust with these Christians. It's amazing.
Well, you could tell a Christian, I think Satan is really God. And they'd be like, yeah, I hear you.
Yep.
That's different, but yeah, I get it. They're just so dumbed down. I can go ahead and read that one passage, Bolshevism from Moses to Lenin. This is the very problem. It's just so well put. I can't possibly come up with a better way to describe the Jewish problem than what Eckert and Hitler had. So this is it. The truth is indeed as you once wrote. One can only understand the Jew when one knows what his ultimate goal is. And that goal is, beyond world domination, the annihilation of the world. He must subjugate all the rest of mankind. He persuades himself in order to prepare a paradise on earth. He has made himself believe that only he is capable of this great task, and considering his ideas of paradise, that is certainly so. But already in the means that he employs, one sees that he is secretly driven to something else. While he pretends to be elevating mankind, he torments men to despair, to madness, to ruin. If he is not stopped, he will destroy all men. His nature compels him to that goal, even though he dimly realizes that he will thereby destroy himself. There is no other way for him. He must act thus. This realization of the unconditional dependence of his own existence upon that of his victims appears to me to be the main cause of his hatred. To be obliged to try to annihilate us with all his might, but at the same time to sense that that must lead inevitably to his own ruin, therein lies the crux of the matter. If you will, the tragedy of Lucifer. So are we not seeing this exact thing with Ray Kurzweil, George Soros? I know Klaus Schwab himself isn't Jewish, although I could swear I saw that he was Jewish on Wikipedia, or somebody that he's close to who wrote that stupid document he wrote. What about I can't even remember the name of it. What am I
Well,
thinking of? He wrote a little tract, Klaus Schwab,
was that the one where he has? Yeah, go ahead.
something about how we need to go AI and whatever.
Well, he's the one who wrote like you'll own nothing and be happy one day. Is that
Yes,
some?
that
Yeah.
guy. Okay, so he has a little tract that was available on Amazon and still is. I could swear that one of the authors of one of those was Jewish. But then he has is his name Ari? That
Ari
disgusting
Emanuel?
little troll-like Jew.
Is that Ari?
That
Oh,
the
Ari Flesher or Ari Emanuel?
Maybe it's something else. It's that creepy Jew that's talking about how we need to keep everybody happy with drugs and video games, and that we're all going to turn into AI. And he's part of the World Economic Forum, and he's always whispering like worm tongue into Klaus Schwab's ear.
I'm trying to think of who it
He's
is.
straight from Israel.
Right. They probably showed him a lot during the whole COVID thing, right?
Yes. Do
Yeah,
you know who I'm talking about?
I think so.
What's his name? Let me try to just type in
Sure.
WEF Jew. Maybe it'll come up. Um, let's see. Now I keep getting just Klaus Schwab.
Yeah, well, you're looking that up. One of the passage you read right now from chapter 7 of your book, it reminds me of a phrase the Jews have. They call it tikkun olam, which is repairing the world. So they think it's their responsibility to repair the world, which is really just code for them dying. dominating, like like it says in that passage. But in doing so, like you said,
Yes.
because it's a worldview that is against nature, it's going to end up destroying the world, the people in it, including them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back, I remember even Hitler talking about how the Jews are so arrogant that they think only they have the answers for everything. And again, that's where they say, oh, we're elevating mankind. Only we can solve these problems. They're doing the same thing through the World Economic Forum. It's the same thing. And if you look into the COVID shots, it's almost 100% Jewish.
Right. Yeah, and the World Economic Forum that's where they train a lot of the, like, say, AOC and people like that, and Gavin Newsom in California. They that's where they go to receive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Let me see if I can find this. It's not coming up. Oh, here it is. Yuval Noah. His name's Yuval.
Yuval Noah.
Yuval? He looks like a literal troll. Um, Yuval Noah Harari. That's the Jew I'm thinking of. This Jew, this is what you call, like Hitler in his notes, when he wrote those early notes, he had a few different names for Jews, like different types of Jews. I'm pretty sure I have that in here. He would be, this Yuri guy would be considered like a blood Jew. This guy's out to kill everybody. He's extremely dangerous once these people start getting into power. Fortunately, they tend to let the cat out of the bag too soon. And so, the Goyim start to go, wait a minute here.
Yeah, like they overplay their hand.
Yeah, thank God they tipped their hand too soon. And that's something that Joseph Goebbels said. He said that the one thing that's great about Jews is they always tip their hand too soon. They let you know what they're all about before they actually have a true hold on things. And that's when it unravels for them.
Right. And because they're like, and you probably have a better idea of this. Well, it definitely seems like even the founding of America, when you go back to the Pilgrims and Puritans, was very Jewish. But definitely from an outward point of view, the 20th century, with the two world wars, the Federal Reserve, and then of course from a religious point of view, the C.I. Scofield Reference Bible, their empire here in America, at least the visible empire where they're obviously ruling, is very short. So it seems like it's unraveling in a short period of time when you consider the big scope of history.
Oh, yes. And that's because it's pretty much rotten to its core. Right. So Hitler has a few different types of Jews: the humble Jew, the officious Jew. So that's somebody who's eager to give unwanted help or advice. That's like every Jew we've ever known. The impertinent Jew, showing a bold or rude lack of respect, especially to a superior. Impertinent Jews everywhere, where they basically undermine or mock everything sacred in this country. Christianity to be mocked. Your European values, Christmas, even Halloween is under attack. They are bringing everything down. And then you have the domineering Jew. This would be little Mr. Yuval, showing a desire or tendency to exercise excessive control or authority over others. And it was, in fact, Israel Tangvil who coined the phrase the melting pot and called America, quote, his own land, end quote. So if that's not arrogance, I don't know what is.
Right. Yeah. And they take it's the double talking about the Judeo biospirit, like a gaslighting biospirit, that they will admit and take pride in their prominence that does not match the percentage of Jews that are in the country, their prominence in these positions of power. But then when you mention it, they gaslight you, label you anti-Semite. And this is the thing, like, so yeah, we're at, if you look at America, and even Christianity in America, we're like in the 12th round of a fight with Mike Tyson, but like getting our butts whooped every round. And this leads to kind of, do you think that there is a Christianity or a version of Christianity? Because in your book, I know it says that the Jews fear the rise of true Christianity and nationalism. Do you think there is a version of Christianity that can withstand Jewish infiltration and can be a strong wall of defense against the Jewish biospirit? Or do you think that it's just innate in Christianity to be subverted by Jews?
Oh, I absolutely believe there could be. And it's basically the Nazi Bible. If
Right.
people were to go with the National Socialist version of Christianity, which I just call it Christian revisionism, it was simply Christianity revised back to how it should have been before the Jews undermined and tweaked the whole thing to benefit them and them alone, and to get everybody. The fact that we call them the chosen people of God, that right there, when I realized that and thought about it, that is the most ludicrous, stupidest belief anyone could ever have. And when I hear Christians say, oh, well, I mean, we have to do this in Israel because they're the chosen people of God to fulfill prophecy, I can't even deal with it anymore. I can't listen
Yeah, I
to it.
can't either.
How
And
can
it's
you
such a
be
mind
so
screw.
brainwashed?
Yeah. It puts you in mental
So,
slavery as soon as you acknowledge another people as the chosen people. It puts you in mental
oh,
slavery.
yeah, Hitler
And
really didn't like that. He's like, the chosen. I mean, these people are disgusting. There's nothing more depraved than this people. And Martin Luther said the same thing. When he finally came towards the end of his life, he wrote on the Jews and their lies. It is the most vicious anti-Jewish tract. It's much more vicious than Hitler ever was about Jews. And that was the founder of Protestantism. And he was a stark defender of Jewry before he came to this realization. And he basically said, is there any devilry? Is there any just disgusting filth and debasement that can't top a Jew? They're the worst. And he called for them to be hanged from gallows 7 feet higher than any others. He absolutely hated them by the end of his life. So there you go, case in point.
right, yeah, because when you deal with them and you deal with those Shabbos Goyim, like you said, it's eternally frustrating, and you realize you're wasting your time spinning your wheels with them. Like you mentioned, Martin Luther, I think he had this idea where he was going to convert them, and I think the frustration was
Yes,
that after years of trying to do so, he realized how wicked they were.
exactly. Yeah. And he got a load of them. So, yeah, I would definitely say that a National Socialist Christianity could withstand any Jewish assault. And there's something, and I try to bring this out in the book. There is something special, and I would say it's spiritual, metaphysical about Hitler and the NSDAP. They weren't just a political movement, just a person. There's something more to that. That was basically like I'd call it one of the most important historical manifestations in human history, what happened there.
Absolutely, I
And the world
totally
has
agree.
taken a completely evil trajectory. And maybe this is what has to happen. And Hitler said this, maybe God made the Jews, allowed them to be, to remind us what is bad, like what not to be. Like, just like you have parasites in nature,
Right,
we have this parasitic race. That's everything you don't want to be. And it constantly
exactly.
keeps us healthy and knowing, nah, that's not what we want. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree. And when I roll back before I became awake on the Jewish question, and I never, because I grew up Catholic, I never believed they were the chosen people. But I
Hmm.
kind of had more probably the not neutral. I kind of never liked the emphasis the Christian churches had on them, coming from a Catholic background.
Right.
But now that I'm fully Jewish awoke, and I roll back my interactions with them, and even people that have this Judeo bio spirit, it's yeah, it's the humanity at its worst. It's
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like, yeah, they're the Judaism is the incarnation of hatred, and I know this is a quote from somebody, and the Jew is the personification of the lie. And even like I mentioned earlier in that dinner, his love for America was insofar as its loyalty to Israel and its support of Israel. So even, it's not an irrational thing. It's a realistic view of the Jew and their loyalties, and it explains
Right.
why they've been kicked out of so many nations.
Right.
And yeah,
Everything they do is in their interest. Like I would say Europeans can be truly altruistic. We went through a period when we would subjugate other people and, play the superior role. That did happen, but it's like this constant evolution of mankind and its thinking. We used to be much more warring. We're doing less of that now. So this is all part of the evolution of it. But if you look at Europeans, we are the most tolerant, altruistic race in the world.
absolutely,
And Jews do
absolutely.
not have that. That is 100% missing from their composition. So if a European could kind of try to picture like a race of psychopaths, because that's what's missing in the sociopath or the psychopath is empathy. It is completely lacking from their makeup. They just don't have it. It doesn't even exist. The Jews do not have empathy. They are not altruistic. They are 100% self-interested. And when they act like they're the friend of African Americans or illegal immigrants or whatever, it is solely to benefit themselves and to destroy their enemies, which happens to be Europeans. We are enemy number one for Jewry. I don't see how anybody can't see that. They are systematically destroying all of our countries. No one else's countries are being destroyed like ours, and they're doing it on so many fronts. We now have the LGBTQ thing, so they're doing it through education, like they did before the Nazis came to power. They're doing it through pornography. They're doing it through warfare with this Ukraine thing. They're doing it financially with the usury. They're doing it by attacking like everything that America stands for, your patriotism, your nationalism, your holidays. So we have the cultural aspect of this. They are attacking everything. And it's basically a free for all on just white people's.
Exactly, that's the war.
Everyone else is sacrosanct, but Whitey you can murder Whitey. And yeah, maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, they are celebrating the destruction of white culture and white people, and even
Yes.
you see this. I mean, this was the thing at a job that I realized this hatred of white people, and even because I have a Spanish last name. I'm Spanish, Irish, and Basque. And
Hmm.
when I got my DNA back, I was talking to a friend, someone who'd been friendly to me up until that time, a black woman.
Hmm.
When I told her, yeah, I'm largely, just all European, but Irish, Spanish, and Basque, and their whole attitude changed towards me when they found out that that's what I was. When I showed them the DNA, when I got my DNA thing, and I just saw there's this even people, and this is what a lot of white people don't understand, is that even the people of other races, not everybody, but some people, especially with Jews, of course,
Hmm.
they may be nice to you to your face, but inwardly they still think you're a white devil. And that's what whites, who being altruistic and empathetic, don't understand. You are in a war right now. And like you
Right.
said, the war is between the Jew and the European. And everyone else are just merely, basically pawns in that game, in that war.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's it. And when you understand that, you see the world completely differently. And that's
absolutely.
exactly, I can't emphasize this enough. And it's a point that's in Positive Christian that the Jews see it that way. Like they see this as our existence is purely material. There is no afterlife. It's this life only. That is the only thing that exists for Jewry. They don't have an afterlife. They are their own God, effectively. They are Antichrist. They are the one race that opposes, or the one people, culture, group that opposes Christ and denies him, the anointed one, the intercessor of God, whatever you want to call him, son of God, God. They're the ones that deny him. And they are out to take over the world through finance. They do it monetarily. So money, and this is in Albion and Zion United, money is just a means to that end. So when Jews get involved in high finance and they have so much money, it's to acquire more and more authority and power. And we're going to end up in a world where they ban everything we have to say. We're going to have zero free speech. We won't be able to publish books at all. We're going to be effectively killed. We're going to have a situation that's very similar to South Africa, if
Oh,
not the
yeah.
same. That's where we're headed. So if people cannot see the world in this way and get that this is really what's happening, they're lost. And it's like all the other stuff that's happening is just kind of fallout from this war between your so-called Nordic race soul and the Jewish race soul.
Yeah, that's what people have to realize. You are in a war, and you have to be aware of who your enemy is, and it is the Jew. And you have to be aware that the Jew's going to use other people to do their dirty work. And you
Right.
mentioned about, Christmas. That's one thing that I'm finding now in Christian circles. More and more of them are trying to keep celebrating Hanukkah and demonizing Christmas.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's crazy. Yeah.
I
And
never thought they'd get away with coming after Christmas the way they have, but it's getting to where people are afraid to say Merry Christmas. They're afraid. I
right.
mean, did we ever see ourselves here 10 years ago? I didn't. I couldn't foresee this. It's
Yeah,
gotten very bad very quickly.
I couldn't foresee this either. Not, do you remember a movie with John Travolta? And I don't know if it was Samuel L. Jackson, not Pulp Fiction, of course, but there was this movie where the roles were reversed and the white man was like the minority and the one being mistreated, and it was the black man that was kind of ruling society. It came out in the early 2000s. It was just like a role reversal movie that, tables were turned.
I
And
didn't see that.
yeah, at that time I thought, oh, this is, BS, but it's like come to
It's
fruition.
actually
Yeah,
happening.
yeah, it's happening. And, you know, um, that's the war. It's the war. And this is what I tell friends that are not white. I said, listen, don't get offended because I'm always advocating for white people, because this is the war between us and the Jew. You guys
Right.
are the sideline, and you guys will participate on one side or another based on, who you feel allegiance to and who you get used by. But this is the war between the white man and the Jew, the Aryan versus the Jew.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Well, Veronica, it's been a pleasure interviewing you, and hopefully, it'll probably be a few months, I'll reach out to you again because once I finish Warlords of the Iron Cross, I would love to talk about that book too.
Okay.
And yeah, so did you want to, you know, uh, for people that want to purchase your books, do you have a website or an email address you wanted to put out there?
I don't have a website, but they can email me or go to the BitChute channel. It's
Okay.
powerwolf1889 at outlook.com, and all the books are listed with the prices on the BitChute channel. So we
Okay.
can just put a link to that if you want to. And
Yeah.
that's pretty much it at this point. I am going to be working on a book. It's going to actually be two small books. One of them is whether or not Hitler went to Switzerland and solicited Swiss support in the early years. There's some debate there, and there's also a debated speech that he delivered to Swiss industrialists. So we're not sure if that speech is genuine, but it does exist. So that's one thing I want to do. And then the other thing is I have another SS document that's previously unpublished in English about Freemasonry. So that's another book, just a small, short pamphlet style book that I want to put out. Because I don't think, and even Anglin kind of poo poos Freemasonry. No, it's still very alive and well.
Oh
Very
yeah.
alive and well. I would say the World Economic Forum is like the embodiment of the lodge.
Right. Isn't Freemasonry really big on this fascination with Solomon's Temple as well?
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, if everything about their whole ideology is based in like Egyptian pharaoh it's really crazy. I think one of the best researchers on that was that Sean Ross, HROSS. He's a little nutty, I will admit that, and he's wrong about the Nazis because he thinks that they were also part of it, like they were a branch that kind of broke off, but they were their own kind of Masonic entity, as it were. He just his information doesn't bear out like when you do the research. It's like that doesn't make any sense. Why would the entire Freemasonic world viciously and ruthlessly throw down fascism if it was in league with them? That doesn't, no, that's not how it
Right.
works.
And
So
sometimes I think that that may be the easier path to go for people to try to attribute the National Socialists to this. They were just, basically, Zionism. They were used by Zionism because it's the easier road to take. Because once you identify that the National Socialists, that they were the solution to the Jewish
mhm,
problem, and that was the ideal that we should strive to, it's going to put a target on your back. So it's almost easier to say, well, they were just pawns, or they were just part of the conspiracy. It's like an
right.
easier route to take, and instead of just looking at it and say, what, this is what should have endured. This was the solution to
Yeah,
the problem of Bolshevism, Zionism, and
absolutely.
capitalism. And so I
Yep.
feel like sometimes it's easier for people just to say that.
I would agree. And the whole Zionist thing, it was the entire world that opposed Hitler trying to deport Jews peacefully that forced his hand. And he basically said, yeah, if I have to send him to Palestine, so be it. I mean,
Right.
they blackmailed him like crazy. So that did happen. But I mean, I've gone into that. It was like 100% world conspiracy and blackmail that caused that whole Zionist project. And if one looks at it like really objectively, a whole lot of Jews were put there before and after the Nazis. So, in fact, it was mostly after the Nazis, after World War II. That's when the
Right.
majority emigrated to Palestine. But yeah, I mean, that's more complicated than people like to say. This whole
Right.
Henniker Cardell, Hitler was your founding father of Israel and he was Jewish, half Jewish or something. It's total nonsense. It's
Right.
like,
And
yeah, technically you could call him a founding father of Israel. He was pivotal to the foundation of the state, its early finance. But again, it was the result of blackmail. The whole world conspired to make it impossible to put Jews anywhere else. He
right. And then
wanted to put them in Eastern Europe.
yeah, and it's the same thing with people say, oh, well, Hitler was funded by the bank. Well, where else is someone going to get their money from if they're going to, have to fight a war? They're going to need money from banks. That's where you get money. So it doesn't make Hitler, a
Right.
co-conspirator with the
Right. Yeah.
Rothschilds. Yeah.
And that Sutton book is problematic. Because he tries to say that some Sidney Warburg financed Hitler. There's no Sidney Warburg. That character doesn't even exist. There's no original documentation for those claims of Sidney Warburg or anybody around him. But yeah, I mean, bottom line, you do have to get your financing from somebody. It's what you do with the financing that counts. And eventually, he had his own bank. He had Hjalmar Schacht and the Deutsche Bank, the Rice Bank. They had their own bank. They could do their own money printing. People seem to
Right.
forget that. It's like, yeah, they started out financed, but then they broke away and became independent.
Yeah. And then, that's the thing too, is that's the two things just off the top of my head that strike out with this Jewish, um, how did you say it in the book? Atheistic hatred towards Germans, towards to Germany and Hitler.
Oh, yeah.
It's this, the
Hate.
Weimar Republic. Yep, hate this, the pornographic culture that they had before, Hitler and the National Socialists took the power in Germany, and actually took it legally. It was a legal transfer of power, as well as the
Right.
economic miracle of Germany. And,
Yep.
and this is why you have the boycott of Germany by Judea, the declaration of war. And then,
Right.
lately, I mean, before we end this, lately I've been just researching the Jewish roots of the Italian mob in Meyer Lansky. I don't know if you ever looked into all
Oh,
that
yeah.
too. That's another
Yep.
thing.
Yep. everywhere where something bad is happening, they're there.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, I think it is important that people realize and research into the whole COVID vaccination thing and the WEF. It's pretty much 100% Jewish. And the whole AI transhumanist thing, Ray Kurzweil, Jewish. It's like 100% Jewish. I mean, he even
Wow.
wrote a book called The Singularity. It can't get any clearer than that. He's like, here's our agenda. Here's how we're going to get there. Boom. I mean, do people think he's just lying, that just saying that just for fun? This is really what they want. They are the ones that want transhumanism because this is the only life that we have according to the Jews. There is no afterlife for them. They don't have spirituality. They have only material, only the here and now. They are their own God. They've even said this. Elie Wiesel said it. He said God died in the concentration camps. So we're our own God. I mean, there's many Jews who have said this.
Yeah, much of Judaism believes that. They don't believe in an individual. Some do believe in an individual, what they call a Moshiach, but some believe that the Jews itself are the Moshiach, the Messiah.
Yeah.
And,
yep.
And it's like Hitler said, they're culture destroyers. They're not a creative people.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're a parasite, like you said, and the incarnation of hatred, personification of the lie. And Weronika, thank you. And yeah, I'll touch base with you on that once I'm done with the other book. And yeah, once I upload this, I'll put in your BitChute link, and that way people can contact you. Because I've had a couple people, friends of mine, ask for your information because they're interested in purchasing a positive Christian and/or Warriors of the Iron Cross. And I'm definitely going to get more books once I'm done reading Warriors of the Iron Cross. But yeah, great stuff and great interview. And thank you for your work. And yeah, I'm just continuing to go through your channel and watch or listen to some of the podcasts you have. They're pretty cool. And hopefully you put out more stuff. Thank you, Weronika. It's been great talking to you. And everybody, salute from California, and hope you guys enjoy the interview.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. Bye, Weronika.